when I was, mountain biking and climbing, that was way better than smoking cocaine. You know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah,
like,
right.
okay, well, but at some point, if you're overtraining and you're wearing yourself down and you're not hanging out with, in connection with others, because you got to get your miles in and you're like just always prioritizing that as opposed to self-care, then you probably should look at it too.
This is the Knockin Doorz Down podcast. If you're looking to hear stories of hope, inspiration, and turning your greatest adversities into your advantage, well, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Jason LaChance, and through my addiction recovery and struggles with anxiety and depression, I dug into my passion of speaking with people who have transformed their lives. And my guest is the founder and national executive director of the Phoenix, Scott Strode. On his recovery journey from drugs and alcohol addiction, Scott found self-confidence. He shares how he did so, as well as developing a new identity through physical activity and sports. We also share some amazing insight on how you can get involved helping other people and being of service in your own community. Scott Strode, thank you for joining me on Knockin Doorz Down.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to finally connect. And Scott, the way I like to start off, and I find especially the people I speak to in gratitude are pretty switched on to this already. 3 things you're grateful for today.
Oh, 3 things I'm grateful for today. I'd have to be my family and my work, or my service position, I should call it. and then just a continuing opening sort of awareness to how some of the stuff in my early childhood sort of played out in my life in a way that was sort of unhealthy for others and for me. And now, as I'm aware of that, I can start unpacking it and changing some of those behaviors in a way that I'm contributing more to the world.
Wow, I'm really gave me a little bit of chills. That's some area that I've really been doing a lot of work on. Do you mind on touching on some of those? Because I know I believe you and I are really aligned, and science is getting there, and more people. And we always talked about gateway drugs. Well, I don't know about you. For me, it was trauma, and the vast majority of other addicts that I, in recovery that I've gotten to know, same.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I don't know how much you want me to jump into it now, but I think that for me, my drug and alcohol use was really born from self-esteem wounds. And those wounds were a result of some adverse childhood experience and trauma,
Yeah.
so stuff, I had a father with untreated mental illness, and I had a stepdad who had, 6 to 8 martinis at night after work, and every single night, and maybe it was more, I don't know. But and then, also just I also have dyslexia. So, or in school, like, yeah, it was tough to fit in around the academic structure. And so instead of looking stupid, it was just easier to cut school and go out and get into some trouble. And that's what I started doing pretty early. So.
Wow. I've been encountering it more and more of people that have had some learning disabilities that really, I don't know. I think we have a special ability. The more I dig into dyslexia and the skill sets it's actually given me, like I really embrace it now. But I know that struggle. I mean, I felt the same way. I was in 3rd grade going to math for 4th grade and 2nd grade reading, and I was doing terrible there. And and it was, I was getting called a lot of those names. I mean, I have an amazing mom who's supportive and got me help and special tutoring, but it was still the story that I was attaching myself to, especially as a kid, right? And and if the girl that you think's kind of cute says, "Oh, geez, what are you going to this stupid kid class or something?" Hey, it's a wound that kind of sticks with you.
Yeah, it really does. And you kind of feel, like you're always hustling to find like other ways around this more structured system. And so that fostered this creativity in me, which was great. But, I sort of joke that it's like, imagine kids texting in class, but your phone doesn't have spell check. Like it would just be that's what it was for me as a kid, writing notes. That's what they used to do before cell phones. So like not being able to be part of that sort of way of communicating, and then having to read in front of a class, and spelling bees and all that, and there really wasn't as much awareness around learning disabilities, and that sort of landed me in the VOTEC program. So I was going to learn how to make aluminum siding, and that was my like life path. Not that there's anything wrong with, working in a factory making aluminum siding, but I felt like I had more potential than that. And I didn't really felt like I was seen. And so for me, when I found drinking and drugging, I was just like pouring booze on that pain, made it go away a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and for me, and I don't believe we had talked about this, but like pornography was prevalent in my home, and that was kind of what I really found to be the first drug in really looking back and reflecting upon my behavior and everything else. It was, it was like, oh, that liquid courage gave me the courage to do all the things that were already stupid and insecure guy up in my head. So, I know what you mean. I so know what you mean.
Yeah. And I think that's a great thing to highlight. Like, it's just not, I think of it, I talk about this quite a bit. It's like we're trying to find emotional well-being externally because it's hard to find it in here. And I think when you have those self-esteem wounds that I did, it was almost impossible for me to find it internally. So looking for whatever that thing is that can, give you that little dopamine hit, or help you feel, a little more empowered or valued or whatever. I think as somebody in recovery, my negative coping mechanism got loud enough I had to listen to it. But I think there's a lot of people out there where it's subtle enough that they can kind of, bounce along in life and, damage some relationships with loved ones and whatnot. But because whatever their coping thing is a little more accepted by society, that they never really get to that healing phase, because it's, chasing money is sort of respected or admired. But if it's at the expense of time with your family and your kids, maybe you should look at your relationship with it. It's like anything. If it's impacting you or the people you love negatively, you need to look at it.
Yeah. And it's tough because we're in a society that has a lot of ills. It's the big house, the money, the fancy cars, the attractive partner, and so on and so forth. And yeah, oftentimes we can continue to do those things. One of my mottos is no outside solutions to inside problems. And I can see it with other people that I commingle with, that there is still a lot of that. And not that I don't have my struggles. I don't try to get on here and be pious because it's an everyday thing, but that's just a human thing to maintain a good, level of mental health.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And that humility is key, right? Like, it's a journey, not a destination. And we're sort of aspiring to continue on this path, but even if things get tough, and, I think about this a lot. It's like, I used to do a lot of endurance sports early in my recovery and got into triathlon and climbing mountains. And in periodization training, you level up, and then you kind of pick a stretch goal, and you push, and then you do it again and again. But then you return to this place of like recovering and rejuvenating before you push again. That's actually how you kind of step your way to greater fitness, and I think the recovery journey is that also. Like, we're not always going up. There's times that you plateau and you stay there for a while, and then you have to do some more work and continue to grow. And sometimes you feel like you step back, but you got to remember that baseline where you started is so much lower than where you are today. Even if you did relapse, or even if you did kind of act in a way you didn't want to, and you got to make some amends. You didn't lose all of the progress you made. You just have leveled up some. And I think it's just keeping that in mind helps you realize that you're sort of on the journey, not necessarily arrived. I think if you feel like you arrived, then you're probably in more trouble than you think.
I agree. And I've seen that type of thinking and action knock more people off. I mean, I'm guilty of it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you get a lot out of this podcast, share with a friend. And don't forget the archive of interviews we have. Bam Margera, Brandon Novak, Kat Von D, Charlie Sheen, Edward Furlong, Kelly Osborne. The list goes on and on of amazing guests that have been on the podcast, sharing how they have found purposeful lives. Speaking of purpose, how about a lifestyle brand with purpose? 5150 LTM. That's right. Not only is it a lifestyle brand that can fit whatever it is you're trying to achieve in life, but they give back to the community. And you, the listener of Knockin Doorz Down, get 20% off every time you shop at 5150 LTM. All you have to do is use the code KDD20 at checkout and get 20% off. And how does 5150 give back to the community? Portions of the sales benefit the Carlos Vieira Foundation. Their 3 amazing programs: the Race to End the Stigma, the Race for Autism, and the Race to be Drug-Free. More on the Carlos Vieira Foundation, go to carlosvierafoundation.org. In addition to terrible boundaries, my last relapse almost 3 years ago, luckily it lasted for a night. And I got back on it, and I was fortunate to have that non-judgmental support group that just, hey, we're going to pick it back up. But I've seen it send so many people back out.
Yeah. Yeah. And look at just what you said is amazing, right? That relapse is one night, maybe it could be, it could be 3 beers instead of 3 years, if you're realizing that there's that value there, this innate value. We all have it, right? We all have this intrinsic strength. We all have this innate value, and we're deserving of love and connection, and so is everyone else. But when you lose that sense of self, then if you've connected to it in the past, I think it kind of keeps you from drifting away into those relapses in a way that it's hard to come back from. So that's kind of what we do at the Phoenix. It's all about the connection that people find when they come.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to touch on that here in a bit, but you said something else that really, kind of caught my attention about people get really, and guilty as charged as well, frustrated with the word, the plateau, so to speak, as you were talking about kind of the leveling up in fitness, and don't really examine how valuable that is. I think it really is a lot of the destination syndrome as a part of the journey and the process of it. I don't know what's kind of your take. I mean, geez, you're almost 27 years sober now.
Yeah. Just over 26. And yeah, I actually think that this like polarizing thinking is a negative coping mechanism. Like, I think we think of, there's people that get knocked down, and then there's people who stand back up, and I'm one that stands back up, like it's sort of this idea that there's people that grind and work hard, and there's people that don't. And by splitting yourself into that work hard group, it's like healing some of that self-esteem stuff. When the truth is we all get knocked down, and we all get back up, and we all have peaks and valleys, and we all have tough stuff in life. And we all, for the most part, keep going, and it's like that keeping going is the tough thing. And it's like, just talking to somebody about it today here at the Phoenix, it's a rainy day here in Boston, and it's some days it's kind of tough when it's dreary out and there's not many people around and the energy's down, and but I guarantee you the clouds will blow away at some point, and it'll be sunny, and we'll come out of that little valley and hit another peak. And just, I think narrowing that window is what good recovery looks like. It's like when we don't have to go quite as deep and we don't go quite as high too. That's the tough part, because I think for some of us, we miss that. We miss those high peaks, and you realize that it's a little more, the frequency is tightened up a bit when you're in recovery. The lows aren't as low, but the highs aren't quite as high. So, but in there you find this foundation you can actually build on.
And yeah, and I think it's really challenging for people, and speaking from experience, to really embrace that and be like, whoa, this is a good spot. This is the sweet spot. Life is going to present me the ups and downs, but it doesn't mean I have to lose my shit, so to speak. Yeah. Because before, that's how it would be. Like, oh my God, my parents are having health issues. Well, let's find a drink and find the next unhealthy relationship or whatever it is. And it's a really beautiful place to get to kind of be in that spot. And it's taken me a while to really accept, like, I am in that spot, and it's good. Like, boy, I'm not getting some crazy huge rush, but wow, I'm not feeling like any real low either. If I do feel down, it passes pretty quick. I can identify when to sit in a moment and when to, like you're saying, like, hey, the clouds are going to pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something that is a journey. Like we said, it's just not a destination. And I think the thing that I've been really focused on in my career is like helping folks figure out how to build community around this journey. Because I think when I got into recovery, I think it's hard sometimes for families when people step into recovery, because we played a role as sort of the addict, right? As our substance use, kind of put us in this role, in this sort of, you can think of it as a theatrical play of the family, right? Or the group of friends, or whatever it is. But when you start to show up in a more sort of healed and nurturing way with others, it kind of throws them, right? Because they're like, no, you're supposed to be the one who messed up Christmas for everybody, or whatever holiday it was, or something, and now you're different. And then all of a sudden, other people in the play start to have to look at their role and what role they've been playing. And sometimes the individual in active addiction, overshadows other people's negative coping mechanisms. And so, I think when you find a place, when you find a community that believes in you and supports you and loves you for all the parts of you, even the tough stuff, and you find that love and acceptance for them, then you have something really special, and you can support each other in doing really great things along the way.
Yeah. And that paradigm shift, I mean, let's see, you and my dad have been sober about the same amount of time. And I don't remember it ever being approached with us at all of any kind of family coping there after the fact. Because, my dad and I, not close teenage years, he's pretty much, absent off on his stuff. And so then in my early 20s, when he comes back into the fold, it was butting heads, because he immediately wanted to come in and be dad to the kid that was maybe 14, that's now 20, and bring those lessons. And I don't recollect any, hey, family, come on in here. Let's have a conversation, because the paradigm is really going to shift here. And it did greatly. And I see that so much with a lot of these families at the nonprofit that I work at. The founder there, he'll relay to me, yeah, the hardest thing is getting some of these parents. It's like, well, they did 30 days. They're in a treatment. They're cured now, aren't they? And it's like, oh, no. Getting the drugs or the alcohol or whatever it is out of the way is just the start.
Mm-hmm. It really is. You almost have to You have to get to know each other again. I feel, you know, my recovery happened pretty early, but the real healing, I was probably, 6 or 7 years or 15 years in. It was kind of a big window. But but I think for folks that are in relationships or, have kids at the time of getting into recovery, you have to get to know each other again in a new way, because there's history there, and that, that's why at the Phoenix we say that it's open to anybody impacted by substance use. Sometimes we have the person themselves who's struggling, but sometimes we have loved ones that come with them too. Or you have loved ones that just show up because they went through the addiction just on a different side of it. And so let's give them a chance to go through recovery together too.
Yeah, that's a really necessary approach. And, primarily with the Phoenix, of course, you guys are primarily doing stuff in the athletic arena. And what a great way to rebuild camaraderie or build camaraderie for the first time, not only between, strangers, and allowing the addict to have a sense of like, whoa, wait a minute. I get to enjoy life, and it doesn't involve me going and drinking and drugging and whatever else we did in our addiction. And it's like healthy and I feel good. What a beautiful opportunity that all you folks, you're in 28 different locations now.
Yeah, we actually are kind of all over the place now. We started in Colorado, but I had got sober in Boston, and our first funding to go out of state from Colorado was in California. And then we finally opened in Boston. So it was kind of like bringing it home for me. But then we came alongside the Stand Together Network. And I know they've been on your show. Brian Hooks and Colette have been on. But, the Stand Together really challenged us. They're a group of philanthropists. And they said, if you started Phoenix again today, and you, knowing what you know now, what you've learned, how many people do you think you could reach? And we really kind of rethought how we grow this program. And so we're now in every state, and virtual programming, certainly, but in person, I think in 42 states or something like that. And we're in probably almost 200 communities across the country. And it's primarily volunteer led.
Did you ever imagine that, let alone that? I do want to talk about kind of your aha moment of clarity, but did you ever imagine that that's where your sobriety would take you?
Not at all. Yeah, not at all. Honestly, my early recovery was probably pretty like selfishly focused,
Sure.
And I'm not like beating myself up for that. That's all I could do. It's all I could muster at the time. But, I was trying to get into recovery, and I saw an ad for this, ice climbing thing. And I was like, I want to do something different. I got to break out. I got to try something different. So I signed up for this class and I tried it. And it was terrifying and challenging, but it started to like break apart this way I viewed myself and the value that I could bring to the world. I started to think like maybe I could be a climber someday. And then I found my way into a boxing gym, and same sort of thing. A couple sober guys scooped me up and started teaching me about boxing, and I started to be able to like believe in myself in this different way, and then, so as I started to heal from that, found triathlon, and I realized I kind of transferred my focus onto those athletic pursuits in a way that became my coping mechanism entirely. Mm. So, I'd train for an Ironman and I'd finish it. And if I didn't have another race on the calendar, I felt empty.
Knockin Doorz Down by Carlos Vieira, now available wherever you get audiobooks.
I wasn't done partying, and I didn't want the binge to end. I think I knew that when I finally got home, I'd have to face what I had done, and I wasn't ready to do that. being responsible for my actions wasn't something I was looking forward to. I had abandoned my wife and baby, my family, and my business. I wanted to avoid the shame of returning to what I had left behind. Even though I was not yet going home, I wasn't sure I had enough resources to continue the binge.
Click the link in the podcast description to find out more.
So I had to get another one on there, and then I had to pick a harder one. Then I had to try to qualify for the world championship. Then I did a mountain bike race, then a 24-hour mountain bike race, So like I was still, trying to fill that void that I had in me with sort of, this time it was with accomplishments instead of with drugs and alcohol. And then, as I did more work on my sort of early childhood trauma stuff, I started to just love and accept myself for me a bit more. And then I just started to love being on the bike, riding with people, or being out climbing with people. And, when I got to that place, it made my work with the Phoenix so much better in being able to help others rise, because I wasn't sort of trying to fix myself at the same time.
Right.
I realized I could do that in parallel with them.
Yeah.
We could both be healing on our journeys together.
Yeah, I was watching, I think it was Dr. Gabor Mate was talking about childhood trauma, and, folks such as yourself and I that can go the addiction route, or because of all those things in the inferiority, they can go for a crazy achievement realm. And, so it's really interesting how people like us, you clear it out of the way, and then it's off to the races in a different direction. I mean, I get obsessed with learning new editing techniques, be it for the podcast, video, audio, reels, whatever it is, and I do have to kind of at times go, okay, you need to chill out a little bit, embrace life, get out from in front of the computer screen, but it's just, I think it's just a necessary part of that journey sometimes.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think anybody should be beating themselves up over it, in the early days. Like, just foundationally, when I was, mountain biking and climbing, that was way better than smoking cocaine. You know what I mean? Like, so like, okay, well, let's but at some point, if you're overtraining and you're wearing yourself down and you're not hanging out with, in connection with others, because you got to get your miles in, and you're like just always prioritizing that as opposed to self-care, then you probably should look at it too.
What are some tips and tools that maybe helped you start to examine that and have a healthier approach to it?
I don't know. I mean, I think so. Basically the Phoenix, should I give a little overview for folks?
Please.
Yeah. So it's a nonprofit, and we use the inherent sort of transformative power of like meaningful activities and connection with others to help each other rise. The majority of the folks that come are rising from the ashes of addiction. And we also have folks who've been impacted by substance use through loved ones. But you just have to be 48 hours sober. That's the sort of price of admission to come. And you have to adhere to a code of conduct or an ethos, which really just says we're here to lift each other up, not pull each other down. And so it's pretty simple. But volunteers anywhere in the country, if you've been touched by this issue, can raise their hands to say, hey, I want to lead a bike ride. I want to do a book club. I want to do art night. I want to teach songwriting. We're doing some music stuff, which I know you heard about. So it could be anything, but our roots were really in physical activity. So we started out with triathlon and climbing and boxing and CrossFit and yoga and meditation. All that stuff was kind of what Phoenix was built on, the community. So anyway, backing up to your question a little bit, which is I started on my own journey of healing, but I had already started Phoenix with like a core group of friends. But I was trying to start Phoenix because if I could help people I felt like I had value. Like if I could rescue people, sort of how I thought of it deep inside, I don't think it was a cognitive thought, but like if I felt like I was helping people, then I felt like I had value. And so I started telling people like about these different trauma workshops and places I heard that did this really good work on getting into early childhood stuff. And one day a friend was like, how come you haven't gone? And I was like, so I was like trying to help other people, but hadn't really done that level of reflection and work myself. And so I went, and it just blew my mind. Like it just was a incredibly cathartic moment to really process sort of the why behind a lot of years of pain and kind of the way I formed relationships wasn't always healthy, and how I treated myself and viewed myself wasn't always healthy. And of course, drugs and alcohol was a huge part of that. And so anyway, that was a huge moment for me, is like getting a little more help around unpacking that. I think you can do a lot of that unpacking with another person who's in recovery. You can do a lot with friends and folks that are deeply sort of self-reflective and have done some of that work. But sometimes you need the heavy equipment, you need like professionals to come in and help you let go of some of that pain. Because with that also goes a lot of shame, a lot of self-worth stuff. And all of a sudden you start to realize that you have innate value in the world, and all of us have this intrinsic strength. We're born with it. Sometimes the world just teaches us that that's not true.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing, because I don't think enough. I think the more that we talk about it, especially as men, the more we can try to reach men, because as well as I do that women are pretty good about it when they get into recovery, or even acknowledging the problem. I mean, the level of men that are suffering out there in the country, if you just look at the suicide rates alone, 4 times higher than women. And I'm not discounting, because it sucks that there's a single person that we have a rate at all of suicide in our country, let alone in the world. But it's you and I are close to the same age, and very much, I don't know about you, was that, a lot of man up talk, and, and really what ends up happening, we just shove a bunch of this stuff down. And for people like yourself and I, it bubbles to the surface in a totally different way. And oftentimes that's justified as manly behavior. Like, oh man, when you were out at the bar and you talked to that girl and you went home with her, dude, way to go. It's like, no, that's not good behavior. That's not being a man. That's not growing up. That's not being emotionally mature. It's so I think it's really important that we talk and try to reach more people in general, but let alone getting men to talk. And it's okay. It's okay if you go to a group meeting, if you go to therapy, if you work through these things, you acknowledge them, let alone share them, is really strong and brave.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us, and just probably all of us, right, have on some level have primary caregivers who are like working through their own stuff too, right? Like I'm a dad now, and I'm still working through stuff in life, but I'm more thoughtful about what I'm modeling for my kids, because of, I think, what I was exposed to as a kid. So, I think that idea that, a lot of us are even trying to heal ourselves through energy we might draw from our kids, and the truth is the energy is supposed to go the other way for kids, right? Like they're not here to heal us. We're helping them prepare for a world that has inherent challenges, and create a safe and nurturing space from which they can launch out, and I didn't really have that modeled when I was young, and I didn't have, I didn't really have a model of what it looked like to be a young man. My brother and I kind of raised each other in that way, and he didn't have it either. So we figured it out together,
Yeah. No, and that really resonates with me as, I was gifted with a wonderful older brother, 4 years older, that, thinking back to childhood, I mean, not that your 16-year-old brother should be the one that talks to you about sex or drugs, but he did. And really, actually, that stuff helped. People are always amazed that, as someone that, struggled with alcoholism for, God, well over a decade and a half, that, I didn't really drink before I was 21. I just didn't. I wasn't the guy that went out partying. If I was at a party, I got the people home and, all these different things. But yeah, it's a tough route when you kind of have that burden of a sibling that's kind of helping raise you, so to speak, and teach you those life lessons that, hopefully it would have come from another source, but hey, we're still gifted with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the truth is those caregivers are just doing their best too, given what they experienced growing up too. Because it's like that's at some point you just got to sort of forgive everybody in the chain, and start again, like start over with sort of fresh eyes and a different way of creating, a nurturing environment for kids to grow up in. And because my dad had it tough too, and I'm sure my stepdad grew up around alcoholism as well, but it's so I'm not necessarily blaming as much as we just need to sort of forgive everybody in the chain and start today and doing it differently.
And do you think that is we kind of develop abilities through our recovery to ditch the victimhood mentality? And through that, with the growing of gratitude and everything else, like, I'm now grateful for my circumstances. My father's made amends to me. And I went, Dad, it's okay. You don't realize how many young men and some women that maybe haven't told me, but directly working with young men that I've been able to help that have had similar circumstances now. Like these things that I always just felt so much like victimized by became such a wonderful asset to be of service to other people. I've let go of any resentment and anger and angst, and it's just not even present anymore.
Yeah. And I sort of went through that too. I mean, I think one of my earlier goes at sort of healing from some of my early childhood stuff, it was a lot of outward anger at my dad and some at my mom too, because I felt like she sort of abandoned me to some of that treatment. And but the real healing for me was to be authentic to myself, right, and honest with them about whether or not I even talked to them about it, but in my heart, be honest with them about the impact that it had on my life and be able to forgive them, because they themselves had their own experiences that imprinted on them and had them showing up that way in my life. So, that was a big shift. Like it was one thing just to sort of have the anger and like express that anger, but it was another to be able to do that and also find a place where I could sort of forgive them and create like healthy boundaries. That's the other part that's tough too, is like, and for me, that meant my healthy boundary with my father was that he wasn't in my life in his later years, and that's hard to do, but that was actually the way I could love him the most, was to not have him in my life. And my mom, it was different. She was in a place where we could talk it out and process it together. And she also made amends. And so, I think it's different for everybody. And it's also different depending on what the traumas were, for some there still needs to be some accountability for folks' actions. I'm not asking for a clean slate, because I've done some work. Like I still did stuff I regret in my addiction and tried to make amends where I could. So I think that's also part of it.
Yeah. Boundaries are just so imperative in life, in general. And I mean, they're tough for anyone to really identify, like, hey, what is a boundary? And let alone, how do I set one? And, it's when I've asked people for a definition, I said, I guess the best way I can put it is this is where I end, the other person starts, that's where they end and where I start, and where the buffer zone, and, owning our own thoughts, feelings, actions, etc. And it's a real challenge not to, when you're talking about your folks and your stepdad, to really be able to embrace, they're a person of circumstance too, and not take it personal.
Yeah. And to have, I have some compassion too for them because they had some tough stuff. So, that's the thing is I think that the longer I do the work with the Phoenix and the more, we've served close to 300,000 people total. Wow. With Phoenix free recovery support programs. And what has really taught me is that we're all sort of healing from something, the human condition maybe, and we all have this innate value, and we all have this intrinsic strength. And that no matter what the world or our circumstances has sort of taught us, that is true no matter what, and when you get to a point then where you can just see people for who they are, not identify them as their circumstance, right? It's a person experiencing homelessness, not a homeless person, right? That's not their identity. And that's why I, talk about struggling with substance use, but I don't refer to myself as an addict, like I struggle with substance use. There was a time I went through addiction, but I think if we just think of ourselves as an addict, as an alcoholic, that becomes part of our identity. That is a piece of us, but it is not our whole story. There's so much more to our story. So I think it's just something to think about.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And I think that is important. Like when people ask, maybe the question of who are you? I don't lead with well, I'm an addict in recovery, or a recovering addict, or I'm always cautious about ever saying I'm a recovered addict. I don't know. I think maybe I'll be able to say that when I meet my maker, so to speak. But I lead with well, I'm empathetic. I'm compassionate. I'm, a passionate person about certain, it's not at the forefront of my identity. It's, I'm a man of faith, et cetera. It's not really what I put out there. It's, you're right. It's like, no, it's a circumstance and a period of my life that has thus thrust me into a totally different space that I wouldn't have even imagined I would have gone to if you had said at 22, hey, guess where you're going to be in 13 years or 23 years.
And how incredible, what you're doing and how you're bringing inspiring sort of messages to so many people and helping people see into all these different lives, to see how people have navigated the world. And, I think it's incredible what you're doing, because we often judge ourselves so harshly against other people. We see something and we think, why does my life not look like that? Or we hear about somebody's accomplishment and why does my life not look like that? And I think when you really tell all the facets of somebody's story, it sort of humanizes us to each other. And you start to think like, wow, that was inspirational. Maybe if that guy made it, I could too. Or that person accomplished something great, but there was this humility there that makes me think that maybe I could do that too.
Yeah. Oh, and you're spot on. I mean, to be transparent with you, when Colette Weintraub and Brian Hooks were telling me about you, immediately ego came first. Like, oh my God, he's around the country and helping so many people and doing so much. And I immediately went into that compare state, and I had to go, whoa, slow back up the apple cart here of self-judgment, Jason. Like, do you realize you've just had the opportunity to meet someone? The ego is out of I would say envy, but let's reframe that in my own head to, ooh, have envy in the fact that this is someone that you're hoping to get to know so that your service potentially could grow greater. You know what I'm saying? It's like all of a sudden it allowed it to eject the ego and not sit there and go, why didn't I get sober 26 years ago? Oh yeah, I wasn't even totally in active addiction 26. You know what I'm saying? It's all these thought processes and just sharing how mine works sometimes with certain things.
Yeah. Well, and the truth of it is, like, now, when we come together and we leverage each of our unique gifts, we can contribute in a way that's so much more meaningful because we're doing it together. And like when we first talked, I just knew without a doubt, like, you would be key in like helping Phoenix get to more people around where you live, because you just have that in your heart. You want to, I think when we all get into recovery, right, you kind of feel like you're getting out of this burning building, but what that signaled to me is like, you're the kind of person that wants to reach back in and get some more folks out of that building.
Yeah. Thank you. And you're right. That, yeah. Sorry. That touched me a little bit. Anyways. All right. I want to ask you before we get to random questions, because I've heard it briefly, but I like to ask people about the moment of clarity and if you recollect where you were at and circumstances and just really that surrender, as we often call it.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I actually stepped into recovery from substances, yeah, for me, it was probably felt like a little bit the opposite of clarity because it was a pretty polluted, kind of brain that was trying to muddle through all this stuff. But, just my last night using was, I was just totally paranoid, like on a bender for a bunch of days and locked up in my apartment, and just like kind of knew in my heart that if I stayed on this path, that's how my life would end, and the idea of somebody having to tell my mom that her son overdosed and they found him in some apartment, and this and that just broke my heart. And I think that was just on top of all the other sort of compounding dark nights, one on top of another for stretched out over a long period of time. I just woke up and something was different in my heart that day, and I didn't drink and use that day. And that was day one, and then just started piecing them together, but had all this energy I needed to put somewhere. And so that's by finding the boxing gym that just kind of saved me, because I would just be in there all day. I trained myself, and then I would be there to help out my coach with new people and show them just how to wrap their hands. And then I learned how to hold the mitts, and I'd hold the focus mitts. And then I would just go there on a Saturday with my gym bag, before the gym opened. And there were a couple other guys that were always there, and we'd meet out front and go inside and train all day and help train others, and then go home. And it just sort of kept me out of that lifestyle. So I think that was my big moment, is like just realizing that so many of my dreams have been stripped away by this way I was living, and I didn't want to live like that anymore.
Yeah. Were you always an athletic person, like competitive in high school and everything else, or this is just a later in life kind of
later in life kind of thing? Like I always joke, but it's kind of true. I was like the guy smoking a cigarette outside the bar and be like, "Who you running from?" when joggers would go by, like stuff like that. I wasn't super athletic in those days. I was on a dart team, if you consider that athletic. But,
that sounds like most of my bar buddies.
Yeah. So, but when I got sober and I was in the boxing gym, my coach said, you got to start doing some road work, right? Because you got to get your fitness up and your cardiovascular fitness. And I said, what's that? And he's like, oh, just run 2 or 3 days a week, 3 miles. So I was like, all right, cool. I can do that. And I tried to run. I ran like 300 yards. I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I was like, had to walk home. But then I just started running like 400 yards and then 5. And then, just started piecing it together and like run walking and just, it gave me something to focus on that wasn't just about the stuff that I feel like I had failed at. It gave me something positive to kind of put my focus and energy towards. And pretty soon I was training hard in the gym and running 3 miles a couple days a week. And then, heard about a half marathon, thought, man, I wonder if I could ever do that. And then I just kept getting sort of bit by the bug. I was like, wanted to try more and more. And it opened up all these adventures to me. And even though it was sort of a negative coping mechanism in some ways because of the extreme nature of some of the stuff I did, the positive was inherent in every single one of those activities was this moment that helped me sit a little taller and a little prouder of who I am. And because so much of that had been eroded by stuff I experienced when I was young. And I feel like I kind of got to meet myself for the first time in those years. So,
yeah, it's a common saying that addicts have 2 lives, right? We kind of go through whatever phase, and then we do kind of get an awakening to ourselves and the exploration. That's the exciting part that I try to tell newcomers, like, you have yet to check out who you are, and it's really cool. And trust me, the longer you do this, the cooler it gets.
It is true. Yeah, it is really true. And what I love about it is the longer you do it, to me, it's not so much about the time. It's just about the relationships you build around you. So when you're shocked by life, like all of us are, I don't have to pick up and use or drink because I have so many people to turn to that love and care about me. And honestly, that's what I was looking for in the drinking and drugging anyway, was like connection and acceptance from others. And in the recovery, I actually found it.
Did you ever do any 12-step work, or what's kind of been any other approach or exploration of spirituality? What kind of have been some of those modalities for you?
Yes, to all of them.
Yeah.
Because I was seeking, I did a bunch of different stuff, and I've worked the steps and had a sponsor, and, through some of my climbing, got to go, feel blessed to have gotten to go to some like the oldest Buddhist temple in Kathmandu and just see like these really spiritual places and, explored faith and a bunch of other stuff. So it's just like, I feel like it just opened my mind to like all the possibilities about how we can connect and feel a value and feel a sense of purpose and also where we're powerless, and be able to turn that stuff over. And so, yeah, I've had a little bit of the whole spectrum there.
Well, let me ask you before we kind of start wrapping up and head towards some random questions. Do you think that there's an area of the population or industry that is kind of truculent about ever asking for help through your time and your being of service to others?
I think that there are little pockets in our society where we still have some stigma around people asking for help and being vulnerable. And I think it's often the folks that we put in the most difficult situations. I think I was an EMT in early recovery, and I think first responders, there's stigma around, at least there was then, maybe there's not as much now, but around sort of asking for help or being vulnerable or opening up. You're just expected to see this really tough stuff every day and get up the next day and go do it. And you're supposed to be the one with the lights and the sirens. So you got to be the one showing up for everybody to lean on or sort of save the day. And the truth is, it's really hard to witness that much pain. And I think, law enforcement, first responders, in the military, sort of cultures where that sort of feels like it has to be perpetuated, this toughness to get through. But I think actually the toughest people I've ever met are folks that are able to tap into that vulnerability, lean on each other in the right times, but tap into their own strength when it's needed. And I always think of it as like climbing a mountain together. It's like you may be the person who gets us through certain parts of the terrain, but in other terrain, I may be better and you may have to lean on me. But that's actually how we get to the top, right? There's some days you're carrying more weight and there's some days I am. But by doing it together, we can accomplish incredible things, So I think that's the spirit I'd like to see a little more in those spaces.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just had a friend of mine on that her addictions started from her PTSD as a RN and working in the emergency room, and I've seen it. God, I'm trying to think all the people. I mean, I've had high performance lawyers, executives, especially firsthand having friends that were first responders, and this is in my active addiction, hanging out with friends that were firefighters, cops, etc., friends that were in or had been in the military. And boy, the morbid sense of humor that oftentimes went with it as a coping mechanism. And so I was like, oh my God, I can say some morbid stuff, but you guys like, oh my goodness. And it's hard, and it is hard, it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people, like you said, are in that situation of leadership. And so it's, if I'm vulnerable, then I'm not a good leader, forgetting that everyone needs a mentor and everyone needs to be a mentee. There's not a point where you reach the pinnacle where you don't need to reach out to people anymore for mentorship. It doesn't work that way in life. It's foolish.
Yeah. I mean, I find that was actually part of, Stand Together and Brian Hooks and those guys you talk to, like they helped us with this idea of like principled entrepreneurship is actually how Phoenix can grow to reach even more people. And the idea that by leveraging the unique gifts of everybody that's part of Phoenix, volunteers and staff and whoever, like somebody's going to come up with the next innovative way to get to more folks, to bring Phoenix into prisons, to help folks that are serving in the military, to bring youth programming into Phoenix, whatever it is. And if we can just find that sort of space for everybody to bring forth their unique gifts and creativity, that's actually how we're going to address addiction in our country, right? By getting everybody in the fight, including the people that are struggling, and knowing that within them is actually part of the solution, if they can get into recovery. So I think that was a huge moment for me in just my growth as a leader, where it was less, I thought I had to be out in front leading always, but instead I create a space now where I'm leaning on others when they have strengths that I don't, and they can lean on me when I have strengths that they don't. And that's how we can get further.
Absolutely. Scott, if you want to tell people more about the Phoenix, how they can find out more, maybe get active in their community, or just reach out and ask some questions, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah, just go to thephoenix.org or pull down the Phoenix app. It just says the Phoenix, a sober community in the App Store, and open it up, and it'll geolocate activities near you. And if there's none near you, you can be the volunteer to start it. And regardless, you can volunteer, even if there's a bunch of stuff around you already. But that's the best way to get involved and to learn more. And you can also go to 1millionstrong.com. That's a music initiative we're doing with the music industry and artists and fans to create sober, supportive spaces at music shows across the country, and to change the culture a little bit around drug and alcohol use in the music space.
Yeah. Well, and that's the area that I'm going to be entering and starting to do more help in, as someone that worked in the rock radio industry for 20 years. I definitely had my experiences, so I'm excited about that. I think it probably won't come to fruition until 2024, but it's going to be pretty exciting to hopefully get some of those things happening at concerts, and especially the music festivals where the most amount of drugs, alcohol, and some of the things that are pretty scary out there. Hopefully it's everything from fentanyl test strips to Narcan distribution or whatever it is. There's a real active movement there that, like, hey, there's lots of people like me. I still love my heavy metal, but I don't have to drink or drug to have a good time. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's
it's going to be exciting. All right, some random questions for you. Are you ready, good sir?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had a nickname?
Nickname? No, I haven't. I think there was like a time when I was younger where I wanted a nickname. Like I was like, oh, you can just call me Strode or whatever, but I never really had a nickname. So I feel a little left out on that one. If you come up with a good one, I'll try to get it to take hold.
Yeah, I just figured maybe we came from that generation where, the PE teacher always used your last name, LaChance.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. I mean, we all probably in relationships get like, oh, the babe or whatever it is, stuff like that. Yep. But if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
What would it be? Oh, geez. I mean, it's hard not to go like just the Superman route, which is kind of the cop out where you can pretty much do anything. You just got to stay away from kryptonite, So, but I don't know. I think yeah, I don't know. I think I'd have to go with Superman in general, but I feel pretty fortunate to have just like this intuitive feel about people, because that's been a gift in the work I do. So I'd just stick with that one.
Absolutely. Who inspires you?
Lots of people. I mean, I think everybody that comes to the Phoenix, everybody who's sort of part of the Phoenix movement, even the philanthropists that like support our nonprofit, because they're saying, I want to see the world be a different place and I want to be part of that change. And the Phoenix community just scoops each other up with love all the time, and I think a lot of society sees us as like the folks on the fringe of society, folks with active addiction and whatnot. But we've actually built a really amazing, like nurturing community across the country. And that's a huge inspiration. And then of course, my wife just always helping me, on this journey as parents together and in our partnership. And so certainly her.
Yeah. Do you consider that you still have any bad habits?
Yes, I do, for sure. I mean, I think the pandemic was tough for me with just like sweets, because like
yes,
Uber Eats, like, and Instacart and everything. Like you can just, in the old days, you used to be like, oh man, I wish we had ice cream, but we don't. So, oh well. Now you're like 15 minutes later, boom, it shows up. So I think that's something I've always been working on. So.
Yeah, same. It's still my biggest vice for sure. Sugar.
Yeah, it's a tough one to kick in the same way. So
yeah, and it's not an everyday habit, but boy, there's times like I just want some ice cream, just like you mentioned, or I have a thing for red vines and jelly bellies, and it's
they're dangerous, man.
Do you have any couple of things maybe on a bucket list that you haven't done that you still want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to like train in earnest for another athletic pursuit. I don't know what it would be. I like CrossFit. I'd like to maybe compete in the masters division someday. Probably need a little more time in my schedule than I have right now at the Phoenix, but I think someday in the future do that, because you see some folks out there that are in their they're in their 60s, they're in their 70s, and they're competing. And so I think that would be a cool thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty gnarly. It's awesome to see. All right. This is always a fun one. I know that you were featured in Brian's book, but let's say you have your own book and somebody wants to license it as a TV show or a movie. Who would you want to play you, adult you?
Oh my gosh. I just talked to my wife about this. It was I didn't really know. I was trying to come up with a name because we were just joking about this the other night. And she said, is it Andrew Scarsborough?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a tall dude. He's actually in Succession,
Yeah.
that show now. And so I'd say him because I'm tall too. And if he got the right haircut, he could pull it off.
Right. All right. One last one. What is something about you that people might be surprised to learn? Maybe it's an interesting hobby that you don't talk about, or could be anything.
Oh, wow. That's a good one too. See, this is funny because I actually listened to some of your other random questions for other guests and I had like answers, but you didn't ask any of the same ones. So you kind of threw me for a loop. I think that, I don't know. I mean, this is probably not a surprise to many people, but something I don't share a lot. You kind of mentioned it earlier, but like when I find something that I'm passionate about, I like want to become a student of it. Like I want to learn everything about it. I like blow open YouTube and just like watch every single video on like, you know, whatever camera I'm into. And then I try to learn how to take pictures and do all the like cool tricks that photographers do with it. And, you know, a year later, that could be gravel bikes, learning about gravel bikes and, you know, what trip do I want to plan on a gravel bike? And I haven't never done one, but I have one. You know, it's like I just like to get into stuff and learn as much as I can about it. And that's actually paid off for me a lot in life, just around the work at the Phoenix and all the different disciplines that Phoenix teaches and people get to experience here.
Yeah. No, curiosity is a must. I mean, what is it? Walt Whitman, always be curious, not judgmental. And like, man, I am such a curious person. I can relate. I'll give you one more because most people go, man, you didn't ask me this one. If you could have dinner with any one person, living or not, who would it be and why? Most people say that's the question they want.
That is the question. Muhammad Ali.
How nice.
I would love to be able to like, you know, sit and just chat with him. And I was so inspired by just like all the things he did in life and also just as a boxer to see a guy that size move that way. We haven't really seen heavyweights like that. Granted, they were a little smaller back then, but to see people with that athleticism was super inspirational. So I'd love to, and just to hear about the real dirt on the Foreman fight and the Joe Frazier fight, and you know, because there was all these sort of giants that met in the ring at that same period of time. So I met him when I was a little kid.
Really?
And he did like a candy bar promotion and I waited in line forever and he gave me a melted candy bar in the summer and he said some poem to me and I can't remember what it was because I was like 4. So, but yeah, I'd love to hang out with him sometime.
That is cool. Yeah, as someone that's a fan of boxers myself, I mean, goodness, the smorgasbord of people that I'd love to have been able to be like at a table, you know, it's like, and a huge basketball fan to be like, oh, I'd love to have Magic Johnson there, but then bring Kareem. Oh, Kareem knew Bruce Lee, bring him. And they knew, you know, Ali and bring Foreman because I'm a Foreman fan. And Sugar Ray Leonard is probably my biggest inspiration, not because of in the ring, but what he shared, you know, going through sexual abuse and his recovery. And it's like, man, so many wonderful people that just, yeah, I'm with you on that. That's cool. All right. This is where I turn it over to you. As I said before we started recording, the Jerry Springer moment. You get the final words. Just, I always ask, you know, anything you'd want to drop for someone that's out there struggling. We do have family members of loved ones who are struggling that you'd want to share.
Yeah, I'd say one of the biggest things you can do is with healthy boundaries, set up a way of telling that person that you still love them and care about them and that you're there for them if they need it. Doesn't mean you're paying for treatment or giving them $20 or letting them stay on your couch or any of that. It just means that if they want to sit with you on a park bench sometime and just be together, that you love them and you miss them and you care about them and you believe in them. And do your own work, because granted, you're probably part of a dynamics in some way. So do your own work and see if any piece of what you're going through is rubbing off on other folks in a negative way. And even if they don't come along with you in the recovery journey, whatever that means, then keep doing your own work.
Website is thephoenix.org. Please go check it out. Scott, Strode, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on.
On that note, keep knocking doors down.
This is the Knockin Doorz Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knockin Doorz Down is all about.